Every single day, managers make choices that literally define a company's future. And sometimes those choices are catastrophic. So today on The Explainer, we're going to open up the playbook on the art and the science of making decisions that actually win. All right, let's ground this in a really stark reality. Back in 2019, Boeing was facing a massive crisis. We're talking two crashes, 350 deaths, and the entire global fleet of its best-selling jet, the 737 MAX, was grounded. Just grounded. And look, this wasn't just some random mechanical failure. It was a failure born from a chain of decisions. Decisions about design, about cost, about training, and about transparency. It's just a powerful, powerful reminder that these managerial decisions, they aren't just abstract things on a spreadsheet. They have profound, real-world consequences. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. To understand how to get it right, we've got to first dissect how it can go so wrong. We'll look at the decision-making spectrum, the different models people use, and then dive into the human factor, all the biases that trip us up. And we'll wrap it all up with a toolkit for making better choices. All right, let's dive in. Section 1, when decisions go wrong. Because here's the thing, not all decisions are created equal. And before you can even think about choosing the right path, you first have to understand the landscape you're standing on. So basically, decisions fall into two main camps. On one side, you've got your programmed decisions. This is the routine stuff, right? Like reordering office supplies when you hit a certain level. There's a rule, you follow it, done. But on the other side, well, that's where you find the non-programmed decisions. And these are the unique, high-stakes, gut-wrenching challenges, like Airbus's monumental $17 billion bet to build the A380 Super Jumbo jet, a whole different ballgame. Okay, on to section 2, the decision-making spectrum. So if those are the types of decisions, what about the conditions we're forced to make them in? I find it's best to think of it like a spectrum, ranging from totally crystal clear all the way to completely foggy. So at one end of the spectrum, you have certainty. This is the absolute dream scenario, right? All the information is available and you know exactly what the outcome is going to be. But let's be real, this is incredibly rare in the real world. Much more often, we're operating under a condition of risk. Here, your goal is clear, you've got pretty good data, but there's still that element of chance. Think about a fast food chain trying to decide where to open a new restaurant. They can use all sorts of traffic data to calculate the probability of success, but at the end of the day, it's still a calculated bet. And from there, things start to get a lot murkier. We're now in the zone of uncertainty. You know what you want to achieve, but your information is seriously incomplete. You see this with Hollywood studios every single year. They can analyze costs down to the penny, but they can't be sure what movie audiences are actually going to want to see next summer. It's a total shot in the dark sometimes. And then, at the far end of the spectrum, you hit total ambiguity. And this is the most difficult state of all, because here, even the goal is unclear. A perfect example is when Twitter was struggling to create a policy for dehumanizing speech. The first hurdle wasn't even finding a solution, it was just defining the problem itself. That's what you call a wicked decision problem. All right, section 3, 3 competing models. So, given this often foggy landscape, how do managers actually, navigate it? Well, they tend to rely on one of 3 core playbooks for making a choice. Okay, first you've got the classical model. This is the ideal, right? The world of perfect rationality where we have all the information and we can maximize our choice for the absolute best outcome. But reality is messy, isn't it? And that's where the administrative model comes in. It recognizes our human limits, what's called bounded rationality. So we don't maximize, we satisfies. We just pick the first option that's good enough to solve the problem. And finally, when goals are all over the place and information is super ambiguous, you're in the political model. This is where decisions get made through bargaining, negotiation, and building coalitions. And that leads us right into section 4, the human factor. Because look, we can have the types, the conditions, the models all mapped out, but we're missing the most unpredictable variable in the entire equation, us. Let's dive into our own brains. All right, I want you to do a quick self-check with me. Just think about it for a second. First statement. I like to decide quickly and move on. Is that mostly true for you or mostly false? Okay, got your answer? How about this one? I explicitly seek out conflicting perspectives when I'm making a decision. Mostly true or mostly false? So what's the deal with those questions? Well, here's the insight from the research. If you answered true to that first one, you might have what's called a directive style. It's fast, it's efficient, but it's also really common for newer managers. Now, if you said true to the second one, your behavior aligns much more with what researchers see in the most successful senior executives. But here's the key takeaway. Your style isn't fixed. It can and absolutely should evolve with experience. But hey, personal style is only half the story. Our brains are basically hardwired with these glitches, these cognitive biases that can totally derail even our best intentions. And the first one we need to talk about is a giant. It's called loss aversion. You ever wonder why managers keep pouring money into a project that's clearly failing? This is it. Loss aversion is exactly why we see this escalating commitment. The psychological pain of admitting, say, $1 million loss just feels so much worse than the potential pleasure you get from a brand new $1 million gain. We're just wired to avoid that pain, even when it makes absolutely no rational sense. All right, next up is a bias that has probably sunk more ventures than just about anything else: overconfidence. It's our natural tendency to just overestimate our ability to predict uncertain outcomes. And if you want a catastrophic real-world example, you don't have to look any further than the London whale incident at JP Morgan. They had this star trading unit that became so sure of its own abilities, so confident in its own genius, that it started taking these huge, complex gambles. And the result? A staggering loss of over $6 billion. That right there is the price of unchecked overconfidence. Okay, moving on to our final section. Section 5, a toolkit for better choices. Look, just knowing that these traps exist is a huge first step. But the next step is actually having the right tools to fight back against them. So let's build a practical toolkit you can use.
So one of the biggest dangers you'll face in any team meeting is something called groupthink. You've probably felt it before. It's that powerful, often unspoken pressure for everyone to just agree and get along. The desire for harmony ends up totally outweighing the need for a critical, honest evaluation of the ideas, and that can lead to some disastrously poor decisions.
So, what's the fix? Well, it's actually surprisingly simple. You formally assign someone to be the devil's advocate. Give one person in the room the explicit job to challenge assumptions and poke holes in whatever the consensus seems to be. And all of a sudden, that person isn't being negative or difficult, it's their assigned role. And it forces a much more rigorous debate. And that brings us to one final, really powerful tool. It's called the pre-mortem. Sounds a little grim, but stick with me. Before you commit to a really big decision, get your team together and ask them a simple but profound question. Okay, everyone, let's imagine it's a year from now and this entire plan has failed spectacularly. It's a total disaster. Tell me, why? You see, that simple shift in framing gives people the permission they need to voice all the risks and doubts they might otherwise keep quiet about. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Before your next big decision, will you have the courage to conduct its pre-mortem?